Coming up on this episode of the Warriors Roundtable.
And we started having about 3 or 4 key casualties. We were exchanging hand grenades with the enemy. Then the Kazovac element got ambushed, so now I've got Kazovac vehicles that are down. 2 days later, we're doing a security patrol. You hear a big boom, and your stomach just sinks. When the Marines returned, they got out of the vehicle, and one Marine is holding in one hand a body bag. People have this romantic idea of combat. This is when it wasn't romantic, it wasn't sexy, it was just grueling, laborious work. And there's fire going on and rounds skipping around, and my vehicle has now pulled up beside me, and I look up, and the gunner looks at me and just does this little nonchalant wave. Hey sir, what's going on? And as I start to see the bomb, he gets on the radio and goes, "Oh, I can see the bomb." I'm like, why didn't I think of it? Get in an armored vehicle, drive up a little bit, use the elevation of that vehicle, and be able to spot the bomb. But no, I didn't think about that. My leadership from below, sometimes they were running the fight. Sometimes it was a squad leader, that was dictating what the company was doing based on using their own initiative and bravery. Hey, sometimes you got to follow those guys and exploit their success.
The views and opinions in this podcast do not represent the Department of Defense, Department of the Navy, or United States Marine Corps.
After their deployment in 2008, some called them the Forgotten Battalion. But the Marines and sailors of the United States Marine Corps' 2nd Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment reject the way the Forgotten Battalion moniker encourages that narrative of broken veterans. Instead, these warriors simply want to be remembered for the mission they accomplished and for the honor with which they have served their country and their Corps. The majority of 2-7 veterans continue to reflect on their experiences while living their lives and pressing forward. These are their personal stories of resilience, with insight to healthy coping and living with hope. Welcome to the Warriors Roundtable. Today on the Roundtable, part 1 of a 2-part interview with former company commander for Fox 27, Ross Schellhaas. We moved in methodically, clearing row after row of buildings as we continued toward Correll's position. Just before we linked up, 2 nearby explosions halted our progress. 2 of my Marines had simultaneously stepped on IEDs. Lopez lost one of his legs, and Clinard lost both. The Kazovac team moved forward to assist with the wounded. Another explosion. The armored vehicle leading the way for the Kazovac vehicle struck an IED en route to the platoon casualty collection area. The injuries weren't too severe. The driver and vehicle commander were both knocked unconscious. The vehicle commander suffered a fracture to his foot, and the gunner took shrapnel to his face. The enemy was shrewd about where they placed their IEDs, deploying them at cannibalizing terrain points, meaning they placed them in areas where if one vehicle was hit, it left no room for another vehicle to maneuver around it. Medevac helicopters were called in. I ordered the rest of my Marines into defensive positions. Once the casualties were safely moved, the attack continued. We resumed clearing buildings. We moved from compound to compound until we came across an area in the middle of the town. 4 Marines had bumped across the danger area, meaning they were bounding across the area while their partners were covered. I moved to the edge of the opening and tapped the Marine in front of me on a helmet, a nonverbal gesture letting him know I was ready to cover his movement. He did a quick shuffle across the open area. Just as he reached the other side, he disappeared in an explosion in a cloud of dust. He would be the 3rd Marine to lose a leg in just over an hour. That is from a book, 15 Years of War, written by Kristine Schellhaas, who offers a unique window into some pretty honest dialogue between herself and her husband deployed in 2008, telling their story. Today we have the pleasure of talking on the phone with Kristine's husband, retired Major Ross Schellhaas, who served with 2-7 during their 2008 deployment. Ross, welcome to Warriors Roundtable.
Thanks, chaps. Good to talk to you.
Great to talk to you, too. I would love, and I'm sure everyone else would love to hear a little bit about where you were in 2008. Specifically, what was your mission? What did you actually do? Where in the Helmand Province were you located, and what was your role with 2-7?
So I was the company commander for Fox 2-7 out of 29 Palms. Our battalion deployed as part of a measure to assist the Afghan security forces, in this case the police, to kind of give them some breathing space and allow them time to train their new recruits. And at the same time, we would be in the various districts that we were sent to give them security, on-the-job training, and as best we can to shape conditions to allow the Afghan governance to expand to these areas that the Taliban had controlled. So we deployed in late March of 2008, and went right into Kandahar. Well, I won't say right in. We kind of planes, trains, and automobiles from Manas into Kandahar airfield. And then we had to wait for all our equipment to come, because the decision to send 2-7, we weren't going as a MAGTAF, Marine Air Ground Task Force, that Marines typically deploy in. You have an air contingent, a logistics element, and then the ground. We were just going as kind of a pure infantry battalion, and we had a few enablers for the specific job we were in. Some more EOD than would normally a battalion would have, explosive ordnance disposal. We had more law enforcement advisors, so retired law enforcement. We had one in each company, and then we were going to link up with some more training teams from DynCorps, police officers, retired police officers. And then we were also, the National Guard had made units of police officer, or, guys that were on there as our primary job were police officers, but were also National Guardsmen. And they made units of those to come over and help train the police as well. And then our battalion ran essentially a boot camp, an initial training for police officers, while platoons and companies spread out to the districts that we wanted to get these police into. And it was not the norm for a deployment, because we weren't deploying as a Marine Air Ground Task Force, which I think in hindsight, we ended up building a MAGTAF after we realized, or it was realized, the kind of conditions and the fight that we were in.
So there was not kind of the awareness or cognizance of either the breadth and depth of the enemy's capabilities or the scope that this mission would end up entailing?
Right, because the idea was that we were going to a place where either police were already at, or that we were ready to get police into immediately. I think part of the problem was, and we worked for an Army command, we weren't really under ISAF, International Security Force Afghanistan. We were under this training contingent that was headed by a 2-star, but they had no forces and they didn't have logistics. It was just kind of a command element where they contracted all the logistics through the Afghan government and then ran this training, and we were really their only maneuver force that was assigned to them, actual troops. They had different training teams, but primarily they looked over the logistics and some CASEVAC for the Afghan police.
So for folks who are listening to this, 2-7, the battalion, their AO, their area of operations, was about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but about 28,000 square miles. Is that correct?
Yep, same size as Vermont.
Okay. And about how much of that was Fox Company, your company, responsible for?
We had two positions. We had one in Musikela. So one of my platoons was over there with my company XO, but they were with they were under a British battalion. They called them battle groups. So it was the 5 Scots battle group out of Bob Robinson, and then the district center there. And so the idea was that the British were going to conduct their operations. They were a battle space owner, and we were nested inside of them to run the training of the police. And there, Musikela had a robust police force. established police force that had a police chief and were actively doing operations against the Taliban. Where I went with my other 2 platoons was a place called Now Zad. There's a district called Now Zad, so it's, think of a county, and then there's Now Zad proper, the town. And I talked to the commander of the police training effort. I asked him, why are we here? Because there weren't any police. And this was midway through the deployment. But he said this was someplace that the Afghan government, somebody high in the Afghan government, determined was an important place to establish governance. So we went there with the plan to establish or to set conditions to allow police to come up there. And up there already was a mechanized company of Estonian armed forces, their soldiers, and then they had a bunch of British enablers because we were in a British battle space. They were the battle space owner, but our mission, the police training mission, nested underneath them. And it was convoluted too because the Gulf company that was further out west, they were under the Italians or the Spanish.
Okay.
So we had our space that we operated in, but we were in somebody else's space. And then, so we had to coordinate, but it wasn't just one unit that we coordinated with, it was multiple. I mean, that was more for the battalion. The individual companies coordinated with whoever space they were in, so to speak, because Echo Company was under a different battle group as well in Schengen. So it was a little muddled, if you talk about a wire diagram of who owns what battle space and who reports to who and who do you coordinate with to conduct different things. And then on top of that, we had very different rules of engagement. Ours were, I won't use liberal's not the right term, but more permissive, I guess. The example that I was given by the British was if there was somebody with an RPG and you saw them and they dropped that, then you couldn't shoot them, according to the British ROE. That's what the British told me. I can't tell you if that was the official position. Ours was not that way. If you were identified as somebody that was a threat, and not just that in that immediate second, a threat, then we could engage.
So Ross, I know it's been a while since you retired, but I'm sure you could still quote us word for word the mission of a Marine Corps infantry battalion.
Locate, close with, destroy by fire maneuver, or repel the enemy's assault by fire in close combat.
And so you go out there, one of your primary missions is to train, but you end up actually engaged yourselves, obviously, in a lot of combat directly. I imagine there's a lot of events that I'm sure are worth sharing, but what's maybe 1 or 2 milestone events that stand out to you from that 2008 deployment?
Sure. And if I could say, it wasn't just, you're right, we were there to train the police, and that was the battalion's primary mission. Again, for us in Now Zad, our job was just to kind of set conditions for that, to get the police up there. And it was a long way. I mean, it was 56 kilometers as the crow flies from our battalion at Bastion, but there was no roads. You're driving in, dry riverbeds, wadis. And so on the fastest I think we ever made the drive was 4 hours. Our initial going out there was like 18 hours. It was so painful because we had 60 some vehicles and taking all the material that we built our FOB out there. So things that stick out. So the first thing we set upon was, one, there were literally IEDs directly outside of our position. So we had to create some breathing space. So we set immediately to where we knew the enemy was at. We spent a couple of weeks getting our feet wet and conducting patrols. We were finding IEDs. And then we would just pick an objective where we had seen enemy activity, and we would go and clear that. Now, we couldn't hold anything because I didn't have enough people. Essentially, the patrolling effort and the security of our own position took a platoon. So when we would conduct operations, kind of everybody out,
Sure.
We completely exhausted the guys that were on guard because they would go on. It's a one squad standing guard, and they would go on, 4 hours before the attack, and our attacks would usually last 6 to 14 hours, and then they would stay on after. So the guys that are just coming back can kind of get some food, refit, and then clean their weapons and assume post and begin the rotation again. Mm-hmm. But we conducted about 8 different operations, and the first one was one of those, we called it trench line, and we went to a position where the Taliban were along a trench line. We weren't very creative in our picking of naming operations. And, that operation went fairly smoothly. We had a lot of success and kind of went beyond a bonus objective beyond what we had done. And we'd inflicted casualties on the enemy and kind of, say there's a new sheriff in town, mm-hmm. because the Estonians and British weren't really allowed to operate that way. And the British and Estonians that were up there absolutely loved it because the Estonians and Brits could not plan any of that stuff, but they could, once we became engaged, they could become involved. Mm-hmm. So they would essentially be a reserve, or even at times like a counter punch when we got to certain objectives. And, we would talk through the what ifs if we get contact here and this. And they had these really great APCs as well that were similar to our LAVs, only without a turret.
Okay.
And they were fantastic on the terrain up there rather than the up-armored Humvees that don't have the suspension or the power to really go across broken terrain like we were on. We weren't operating on roads. So that operation went well. We had 1 Marine wounded, and, there was a lot of high-fiving and everything afterwards. It was the following one, which I think with that excerpt, well, it was the excerpt from my wife's book, and it's the one that I kind of refer to, that a day of days in our time there, where we had all this success and, no casualties. We inflicted casualties on the enemy. Well, this one was a big kind of punch in the nose day. Mm. And, it started out that way. I had sent one of the platoon commanders, actually it was his idea. He wanted to, he thought if we could set up, push out into the town, and he would sit about 8 hours before we left. And then once we started our very kind of larger movement, he was there with the squad to ambush anybody that was coming to address the main body. And so his name was Art Carell. Mm-hmm. And as the other platoon commander, Ryan Guthrie, was taking his Marines, and we were clearing systematically through this, and I was moving back and forth between the squads, and that's when we got the radio call when Clenard, I think my wife uses the name Lopez because I don't think that young man either authorized or led, but mm-hmm. they simultaneously stepped on IEDs, and the call came in that they were getting mortar attack because the Taliban would use mortars as their primary charge. Okay. So there's 2 Finns sitting around. So the Marines are like, we just got hit with 2 mortar rounds. That was the initial call. And, that didn't make sense that somebody would be that accurate with 82 millimeter mortars. Well, they weren't. It was IEDs. And there was another Marine that was also injured. He took shrapnel to his glasses. Thank goodness he had those on. He still had quite a bit of stuff in his eyes, but if he didn't have his glasses on, he probably would have lost his sight. And that was from those 2 blasts. We paused right then to get the Kazovac out, and the helicopter came and got them out. That was quite a while. And we went firm and defended the compounds that we were in. We got up on roofs and then so we started moving again. And that episode happened where we're trying to link up Ryan Guthrie's platoon, and that's when the kid right in front of me, he was an assaultman, and running right in front of me, and just like it said, it blew up. And I remember vividly about that was as many IEDs as seemed to be around. There were 2 team leaders as soon as the Marine was hit, the 3rd Marine hit the IED. They were just like running. Mm-hmm. So when those 2 team leaders when those 2 fire team leaders ran off after him, I think it was Montoya and Dahl, I'm screaming at them to stop, to have an engineer sweep up to those guys. but they see one of their guys down and they're just running. So we're the corpsmen. And I had to grab the younger guys that were standing right there to keep people from running recklessly to their guy to aid them. And that's a hard thing to do for young men that just want to, help their buddy. So once we got up to marks and I was so impressed with our explosive ordnance disposal guys. Chris Strickland was our team leader. And he was walking around, and it's like he took it personal that guys stepped on IEDs kind of under his watch. I mean, there was nothing he could do about it.
Right.
He had already found like 3 or 4 at that point, and he was walking around and he was sweeping. It's a staff sergeant out there sweeping. And then he would like put his own body weight on if he got a hit on something, but he didn't think it was an IED, but he wasn't 100% sure. He would start stepping on it himself, like putting his weight on it to proof it. And I just say that because he's an absolutely incredible, brave human being.
Yeah, putting it all on the line there.
Yeah, and again, you could tell he was a really like happy, jovial, make jokes all the time, and he just took it so personal that he wasn't finding these things, and we were finding them the hard way. So at that point, when we hit that IED, I said, look, I'd rather be out in the open and face machine gun and mortars than deal with IEDs. So we stepped out. There was this large field in kind of the center of town. So we got out there. And as soon as we exposed ourselves, we started taking machine guns and mortars. And then all filed into this big compound. Got about, I say platoon, but it was more around 60 guys with all the enablers that we had between engineers, EOD. We had a squad from one of the other platoons in there, and we had some ground sensor platoon guys and extra corpsmen. So it was about 60 guys, and we're in this big compound with no dwelling attached to it. It was almost like it was there. They set up compounds like that for farming and gardening that I think they allow the female members of the family can go and not have to worry about what they're wearing or anything else. So they're in kind of a secluded area and they can farm and do whatever free of prying eyes. And anyway, we're in this compound and it's, mortars are hitting 50 or 60 millimeter mortars. We never quite determined what they were, but basically being fired in the handheld. We can hear the shot out. We can hear the mortar being fired. It's that close. It's just like a few compounds over. And the blast is about the size of our 203 round. But 2 rounds landed on the wall. You're talking a foot wide, and 2 rounds landed directly on that wall.
Oh, wow.
And, it just took no tactical genius on my part. I looked up, and there happened to be 2 203 gunners facing me across the compound. And I looked at them, and I said, use me as an aiming stick and fire over. And they just, they're skilled guys, but I'm telling them they can't see the target. And they fired, and, we were rewarded with the mortars stopping, and we could listen in on the Taliban's radios, and they were saying that guys were injured. So we got lucky and got some breathing space when those 2 guys hit their mark. And then from there, the plan is just to breach through walls, and we weren't going to run through alleys or anything else because that's where they were putting IEDs. We were just going to breach wall after wall after wall and just keep moving that way towards our objective, which, if I didn't explain, was a tree. The Taliban had been using this tree. It was like a platform, like something you would see. It was more robust than a normal tree stand like a bow hunter would use.
Okay.
It was almost like a platform tree house on this gigantic, probably 10-foot diameter tree. And we could see the Taliban up there, and when prior to this, we would see Taliban up there and see them use that as a forward observation, OP, observation post type deal. And then, we correlated, the British really correlated that when you see something up there, you're probably going to end up receiving indirect fire into their forward operating base.
Sure.
So we set that as one of the objectives, knowing that the enemy would be around there, and they were. They did not disappoint us that way. So we jumped out, and my radio operator, we were moved out of this compound, and he and I jumped in a ditch just that's outside of the compound. and we were going to take a rocket shot into one of the walls to kind of crumble it and get it started so the engineers could run up and set a ladder charge on it to blow a hole so we could start moving through compounds. And then we were just going to keep using explosives to move from compound to compound. So my radio operator and I run out there, and they take the rocket shot, and we get the engineers and start moving through. At this point, this is June in Afghanistan, it's about like 29 palms.
Mm-hmm.
If people aren't familiar with the Mojave Desert in the eastern part of Southern California, it's the same almost terrain, looks the same. Marines used to joke that we were just drugged and flown over the hill in 29 palms. And,
I'm assuming you're pushing probably over 100 degrees.
Oh, easily, yeah. I think that day it wasn't quite 110, but it was in between there, call it 105. And, there's one thing to have water, and we all kept one meal on us. But after a while, when you sweat that much,
mm-hmm.
you can drink water, but if you don't have any electrolyte in there to hold that water in,
right.
It just goes right through you. You just sweat it out. Keep in mind, everything that I've just explained has lasted 10, 12 hours in there.
Wow.
At this point. Yeah, it was very slow go. And you're in your full gear. I'm sure most people understand. And we started having about 3 or 4 heat casualties. We're making stops. We're getting water resupply. We're going through water so fast. Everybody's gone through, everybody carried a canteen. Everybody carried Camelback, and then about 3 water bottles on them. And we were going through all of that, the resupply. We'd go through that almost immediately. We got in kind of the last little position, the last little push. We were at a wall, and we were exchanging hand grenades with the enemy. It was one of those kind of surreal moments where you're shooting and you can see people, 30, 40 yards away, see the bad guys 30, 40 yards away. And we got to this one point, and, I looked on the map, I looked where we were at, and I realized that we still had another 300 yards to go. And I kind of looked left and looked right, and, the guys are smoked.
Mm-hmm.
So in one of the heat casualties, we brought up the first orange vehicle. He drove right where I was laying in that ditch before we kind of started our push to breach through the walls of all these compounds. And they hit an IED. I must have been, or my radio operator was probably closer. He was probably 4 or 5 feet from where that IED went off under the first orange vehicle. So we had that one. Then the Casevac element got ambushed in a direct fire ambush in there. So now I've got Casevac vehicles that are down. We've got our Casevac route is blocked. And on top of the heat casualties and me looking at where we had to go, it was just one of those days where I overestimated and with probably a little bit of hubris of what what I thought we could accomplish. It was that point I said, I don't think we've got enough to do this. I'd already pulled out whatever reserves that we had back in the FOB of this attack, and the Estonians were helping with the Casevac and all that. But I stopped our attack, and we withdrew.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't think I've ever heard a story of a Marine company commander ever not reaching his objective,
mm-hmm.
right? Because when we train, there's never a time when we don't reach our objective.
Right.
It always happens. So that sticks out of my mind, one, because of what it felt like such a bloody nose.
Mm-hmm.
Like we got our asses kicked. Now, I think we killed more guys. We didn't have anybody killed, yet we have 3 Marines that, 1 double amputee and 2 single amputees, plus a handful of other routine casualties, broken foot, concussions, lacerations, some small shrapnel wounds.
Mm-hmm.
My company gunny had a grade 3 concussion, so he was out of it for a little bit. It was just a huge eye opener, particularly when you take the trench line operation to the Trio P operation. Very different results. There wasn't a lot of high-fiving going on after that one, and it was kind of a realization of, hey, we've been here not even maybe a little over a month, and we got our nose bloodied pretty good today. And the fact that we didn't reach our objective, which, I was really concerned about the psychological impact that had on the Marines, in addition to the casualties that we had that day. And, it didn't end right then. 2 days later, we're doing a security patrol. I'm sitting in the fob, and you hear a big boom, and your stomach just sinks because that's not one of our explosions. Get a call on the radio, hey, engineer stepped on an IED, Lance Corporal Knowles, who lost his leg. And so we dispatched our quick reaction force, which is a squad with EOD. So we're getting the report, and Knowles comes back. We get that casualty evacuation done. Helicopter comes in, gets him on his way. And then you hear another gigantic boom. And we were fortunate where I was at. We had an incredible shock trauma platoon team, along with their doctor, soon to be Admiral Jim Hancock. He was commander at the time.
Okay.
And, he was like the rock star of emergency battlefield medicine. Thank goodness. He saved a lot of lives, saved limbs, staved off infection, all those things that somebody of that kind of level, commander in the Navy knows. He was in the fob. He ran right over to the operations center, and I'm on the radio, and there's Marines that are frantic on the radio, saying that Echo 6 Sierra, which was Staff Sergeant Strickland, our EOD team leader, was KIA. And Commander Hancock rips the radio out of my hand. He's like, "You don't tell me when somebody's dead. You get him back to me, and I will determine that. You get him back here." And, it took some time for them to gather because there were a lot of other casualties. It was a 25-pound homemade explosive, ammonium nitrate, aluminum, pressure plate, and pressure release. So what had happened was Strickland found the IED, and he was kind of over it, and there was a rock on top of the IED. And what had happened was they made it in such a way that rock was a weight. And if you knocked the rock over, the IED would go off. It was made for a vehicle. It was in the middle of a road on a route that we had been when we had done that first attack. So it was a massive IED. When the Marines returned, bringing Staff Sergeant Strickland back, they got out of the vehicle, and one Marine is holding in one hand a body bag. And the only thing that was there was the lower part of one of his legs. That was the only part we were, that you could tell that we recovered. And so we had a mass casualty drill as well, because there were a lot of Marines that took shrapnel. The whole EOD team was down. And that's, there's another psychological blow, because if the experts are getting blown up,
right,
what does that mean for the rest of us? And it was very unsettling, and the Marines were having a hard time. Rightly so. You can't, that's 2 days, 4 amputees, and 1 KIA, and a very, not that anyone's more important, but the critical part of Staff Sergeant Strickland's job really kept a lot of other Marines alive. And now we've lost him, in addition to one of the other EOD techs had to be sent. So we had one, and they really can't operate like that. And that Marine, that one lone EOD guy that was still okay, he was pretty shaken up. He just lost one of his very good friends that he's known for a long time, who was, disintegrated, essentially. So we loaded up, and we went back out because we didn't get all of Staff Sergeant Strickland. We loaded up. It was a couple hours by the time we went back, and it was like a volunteer. It was mostly leadership that went back out to recover the rest of him. And, we found, I don't know another way to say this, but we found parts of him everywhere in conjunction with the blast. And then we found another part of him separate, and it didn't make sense from where the blast was at. And luckily, the one EOD tech that we still had was smart enough to kind of check around it. And what had happened was, or what we deduced, is there was an IED under this. So the enemy had come back after we had withdrawn those casualties and placed another IED under part of Staff Sergeant Strickland. And unfortunately, we found that one. Didn't have any more casualties after that. But that's when, the reality of what we were doing really set in. And, there's this romantic, I believe, people have this romantic idea of combat, you know, almost like out of a Hemingway novel or something.
Yeah.
And this is when it became, it wasn't romantic. It wasn't sexy. It was just grueling, laborious work that every step you took, you know, am I going to lose my foot? Am I going to get my balls blown off?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to die like Staff Sergeant Strickland did, you know, where you have to send a recovery team out to find parts of me? And again, another, you know, the kind of psychological aspect of war that you can't really train for. You don't really know. And, you know, I had squad leaders approaching me saying, sir, we need to just stay in the fob and do patrols and not do anything else. And, you know, I understood at the time, and my heart went out to this young man.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to pull him aside and say, look, man, it's not going to be, we wouldn't be any safer if we didn't go outside. We would be in more danger. And then at some point, somebody else is going to have to come in and do this. Mm-hmm. We don't want somebody doing this for us, particularly after we've now learned valuable lessons to be able to do this. Now you bring in somebody new that doesn't know what we know, mm-hmm. and they have to learn it all over the hard way.
That's tough.
It was incredibly tough. And, but in the end, like the young guys, they just figure it out, and mm-hmm. they're tough, mm-hmm. and they suited up and went right back out and would do that. We had one or two guys that, for lack of a better term, kind of quit, and that was hard, because you develop a connection to them. Anybody, not just me, but anybody develops a connection to these guys, and they're kind of quitting, and we had to address things like that. But we went right back. A week later, we went back to that same objective and just punched the Taliban right back in the nose, destroyed that, blew up that tree, which I know sounds kind of funny. Mm-hmm. If we're taking this out on a tree, but it was symbolic. We had, sure. something tangible in front of us, and it belonged to the enemy, and the enemy used it. We took it away from them, and en route, we had a pretty good fight to it as well, where we didn't have any casualties, and some of our vehicles got pretty shot up, but it took it back to the Taliban. And again, from a psychological standpoint, I think that was it was pretty important that we get right back at it, use the same guys that were the main effort that took all those casualties on Trio P1, and when they went back for Trio P2, they were right there fighting the bad guys. So it was, it was therapeutic combat, I guess, to get back in there and kind of reassert yourself as the dominant ones on the battlefield, and they were. Mm-hmm. And we had an operation after that one where we lost another Marine. That was pretty tough as well. The rest of the deployment went on. We still lost a lot of legs, and it's hard for young men or young women, but we were all men, to go through something like that and have that kind of fear over you and not understand why the British and Estonians aren't assuming, what they felt was the same risk. And they did, they assumed the risk, but they had a different command structure, mm-hmm. and what they could do was more limited, especially as operations went on. Mm-hmm. We got more and more scrutiny from Task Force Helmand on these things. In use of the British, and I won't say use, we didn't use them, in working with the British and Estonian forces.
Some of your other Marines talked a little bit about the day before and the day of losing Staff Sergeant Guest, and I know that you were there. You were present for that too. Could you talk a little bit to what you guys were doing at the time, and
sure.
how your Marines did specifically? Because I know that they were absolute lions in combat that day.
Oh, yeah. So it was August 11th, and one of our patrols were out and got in a pretty good firefight with Taliban squad patrol. And we called in air, and the British Harrier came down and at a lower altitude than they normally do, and dropped a 1,000-pounder. And it skipped. It didn't blow up. It didn't bury itself. It skipped. Mm. And so now we have this 1,000 pounds of ordnance sitting on the front step of the Taliban's door, and we had to do something. Now, ideally, we just would have dropped another bomb on it, but we didn't know exactly where it was at. We knew a rough area of where it was at. So that squad, we kept the squad out there to watch on it, and then we made a rotation. Had the snipers go out, watch it, and then another squad go out and watch it in the general area of where they were at, just to make sure that somebody didn't try to drive a truck up. Because no one's going to just come and, a couple guys aren't going to pick up a 1,000-pound bomb and walk away with it.
You're right.
But we wanted to make sure that any vehicle activity was not there where they could, hoist it up and use it against us or use it against somebody in Sangin. That would be pretty valuable.
Mm-hmm.
In my 2004 deployment to Fallujah, we lost 9 guys in one VBID, in a VBID attack, and they used an aircraft bomb in the vehicle to blow it up. So that was kind of very fresh in my mind when I thought about a bomb being out there.
Mm-hmm.
So we, in that 12 hours, organized essentially an operation, platoon-size, reinforced operation to reduce that bomb. And we treated it just like we would any other clearing operation or raid. We get out there, and I've got the kid that saw it, that at least was pointed to me, that knew where the bomb was. And I say knew where the bomb was. I'm saying that with air quotes on it.
Okay.
So we get out there, and we're in a pretty good firefight now because the Taliban realizes probably what we're trying to do. Got engagement on the left, right. Mortar rounds are starting to fall on us. I'm about 700 yards away with this Marine. He's laying in a ditch, like a little irrigation ditch right next to me, and we're behind a little pump house, maybe a 8x8 building. So I get down, I take a knee, and I'm trying to be as calm as possible. Just before I open my mouth to talk to him, Lieutenant Correll comes over and says, Lance Corporal Nickel just got shot in the throat. And he rightly asked me, all right, what are we doing,
mm-hmm.
Fox 6? What's the plan here? Because right now we're just exchanging fire. So I don't even answer him. And I kneel down and I'm talking to this young man and I say, okay, tell me where the bomb's at. And he kind of just does this swat with his hand of, it's out there. And I was
Okay.
like, no, where's the bomb at? And he's like, it's out there. And I realized at that point, I never asked the question, does anybody actually know where the bomb is at?
Mm.
And Correll's in my headphones going, sir, what are we doing? What are we doing? I didn't have an answer for him, so I just took off running where I thought the bomb would be. So I'm running, and the sniper platoon sergeant is there, Staff Sergeant Solemn, Lieutenant Guthrie, who I'm sure because I didn't tell anybody I'm going or anything. I was running. I'm up. He sees me. I'm down, running through an open field while all this is going on. And fortunately, a couple guys followed. Staff Sergeant Solemn and Lieutenant Guthrie and the radio operator from Snipers and his fire team were just running across, essentially police calling for a bomb. And I can hear Gunny Guest, Staff Sergeant Guest then. He's now Master Sergeant Guest, but he was, I hear him get on the radio because I still have the radio in my ear as I'm running along, and I just hear this, who the fuck is that? And somebody goes, that's Fox 6. And he's like, oh, Roger. Start moving vehicles up, and he starts doing this. And then one of those surreal moments, like I'm running, and there's fire going on and rounds skipping around, and I look over, and my vehicle has now pulled up beside me and is slowly, it's about 15 meters away from me, paralleling me, and I look up, and the gunner, who is Staff Sergeant Bugle, looks at me and just does this like little nonchalant wave. Like, hey sir, what's going on? You just kind of looking over, you're like, hey, how's it going? And then, again, not thinking about anything, Staff Sergeant Bugle's in a vehicle, and he's about, 12 feet tall off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And as I start to see the bomb, he gets on the radio and goes, oh, I can see the bomb. I was like, why didn't I think it? Like, get in an armored vehicle, drive up a little bit, use the elevation of that vehicle, to be able to spot the bomb. But no, I didn't think about that. And then, so then the four of us are sitting there. You can see the enemy, and they would cut holes in the wall We called them mouse holes. And they would stick their weapons to them. It was incredibly inaccurate fire, but they would do it at full automatic. They usually operated in teams of 3. They would have an RPG gunner, a team leader that had an AK-47, and then one guy that had a PKM, an RPK, medium or light machine gun. And they would stick them through, and they would just pull the trigger. And so we can see them in there. So the 4 of us were looking at the ones in front, the mouse holes in front of us, just at the, when I say at the rapid, I don't mean like pulling the trigger as fast as you can, but like the rifle range rapid. And we would just suppress those holes until an EOD then drove up. And again, another surreal moment. They're low crawling up to this bomb, and rounds are skipping all around them, which is right next to the bomb. And we're all 50 meters from this bomb. And it's almost like they're using the bomb as cover. Now, I don't know if a round could set the bomb off. I don't know that much about it, but I imagined that it's just going to take one round, and I'm going to lose the whole EOD team, one of my platoon commanders, the sniper platoon sergeant, my dumbass, and then the Marines that are immediately in that vicinity when we should have all just been in vehicles. But we were beyond that point now, and EOD creeps up and places explosives on this bomb, sets a time fuse on it, and we load up, and the little makeshift fire team that I was a part of, we just bounded back. At that point, I think Taliban had either ran out of ammo or we had gotten a few of them, and they were moving their casualties.
Maybe they were just so impressed that it puzzled them. They weren't sure what to do.
Well, that or they were depressed. They were so depressed because they couldn't hit us right in front of them. Like, look at these dummies. How can we not shoot them? Right.
So I'm really tempted to ask you what was going through your mind, but I think you've already said 2 or 3 times you don't know what you were thinking.
Yeah. It was, I will tell you, it was fear. And not the fear of like personal injury. It was literally the fear that I did not have an answer for my platoon commander, and that I didn't ask a simple question. Hey, does anybody actually know where the bomb's at? So it was fear that I had just screwed everything up. And that I had just let down all my Marines. Wow. That was the fear. It really, it wasn't even it's not bravery. It's not any of that. It was absolute shame and fear that motivated me forward. And those Marines that went along, well, no, that was actually bravery on their part. Mine was just fear that I had failed everybody. And Nichols is shot in the neck and may not live. Fortunately, again, he got to Commander Hancock in minutes. And, we were able to get him on a helo, and he's still kicking. But then the next day, we actually had a planned operation that we were going to stick to, and it was the same platoon. It was Gunny Guest, Staff Sergeant Guest and Lieutenant Carell's platoon that were the main effort for this one. And this was another one of Lieutenant Carell's plans. And I was going along just to kind of facilitate communication, and then if we needed to echelon anybody into the fight, which we usually needed to do, then I was just going to take care of that. But this was his operation that he had planned. It was a solid plan, and it went out really well for what we inflicted on the Taliban. Unfortunately, we suffered some casualties, and one of those was Gunny Guest. We were just a few, probably 40 meters from where his vehicle, he was all over the battlefield as he always was. And he'd show up and fix a Mark 19 on one part of the battlefield, then he'd get over and resupply another one, and then he'd get over and conduct an assault with some of his Marines, and then he would, all right, you guys are good here, I'm going to go take care of this casualty, and he would just move all around the battlefield. He showed up next to me, and he had a mortar. He had a 60-millimeter mortar, and no mortarmen. There weren't any mortarmen except me. I was in prior enlisted, and I was a mortarman. And so he shows up next to me because the platoon commander had been requesting it. So he shows up, and I was like, hey, Staff Sergeant, what are you doing? It's like, somebody needed a mortar, so I'm here. And so he starts looking around for somebody to help him, and You know, I'm on the radio and I'm listening to everything that Corell's doing. He's got the fight well in hand. And so I become a mortarman and start prepping the rounds for gunny guest and dropping the round in the tube. And he would fire them out. We were on handheld mode of the mortar. And we fired off about 6 rounds. That's what allowed Corell to move to his next position. At least that's what was communicated. And then gunny guest put the mortar back in the vehicle, and he went off to go do something else. I think he went off to go grab another Mark 19 from the fob, which was less than a click away. But when he was on his way, they rolled over a big IED, another vehicle, one that was intended for a vehicle, and it blew him out of the door. The door opened, fortunately, and shot him out. And on his way out, he hit the door with his leg. It did like, you think about the fracture when you saw Joe Theismann's leg break.
Right.
It was like that, but it was at his femur. Like the bottom of his foot was sitting right next to his head. And again, you talk about psychological blows.
Yeah.
Because he was such a, not just of his platoon, but of the company. He was kind of the heart and soul of the company. And we lost him. But fortunately, we had Staff Sergeant Bugle, who himself that day in the same position, one of our MRAPs took an RPG right to the turret. Fortunately, the gunner lived. Miraculously, the gunner lived. I mean, he was badly wounded. But Bugle got up, fixed the 50 cal, and 2 Marines that were in the vehicle were knocked out when that RPG hit the vehicle just from the overpressure. Bugle got those guys up. He himself got back in the 50 cal and got that gun back in the fight because he was kind of my security guy. He would come along with me on these operations, but he stepped into 3rd platoon sergeant role, and it didn't skip a beat from where Staff Sergeant Guest had him. But Bugle was more the serious guy. Guest was the real gregarious. Everybody knew and loved, still love him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was quite a day. I always, and this is not neither here nor there for a company commander to talk about myself, but on those 2 days, I carried 6 magazines on me every time we went out, and I used all my magazines on both those days. I didn't run completely dry. I still had, 15, 20 rounds, but, that's not a good thing when the company commander is using almost all his magazines. Things aren't going well, particularly the day we went after the bombs. That was my own fault.
Was there a point soon after where you looked back at that and thought, what the snot was I doing?
No. I mean, there were those points immediately where I wish I would have made a better decision about things, but I don't think I ever thought, what the heck am I doing? I just wish I would have made better decisions in the planning process. That probably would have alleviated a lot of things. And, and I think too, when you see high level medals going, Medal of Honor and Navy Cross, and not in every occasion, but usually things have gone horribly, horribly wrong in those situations. And it's the individual or a group of individuals that kind of save the day. I always attempted, and I think most of the time we had it, where we had the combat power to deal with whatever when something didn't go right. It had nothing to do with my planning ability. It was just, what you had been taught and what I had been taught and everything that had prepared for me for that particular deployment. All the mentorship and leadership, and I don't mean just the leadership from above. I mean my leadership from below. Sometimes they were running the fight. Yeah. The Guest, the Corell, the Guthrie. Sometimes it was a squad leader, that was dictating what the company was doing based on using their own initiative and bravery and everything else that they did. And I do think that's something that I learned that was important as company commander was, hey, sometimes you got to follow those guys and exploit their success. And it's not anything because you're Rommel, because you're not. And it's that they've done exceptional things that you can to help them exploit that success.